Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased as TEPSA Secretary General to say a few words to you to open this conference. TEPSA is a fantastic organization. It's a network of 46 institutes across Europe and around Europe. So we have a lot of experts, and we try to make the presidencies benefit from that expertise. I would first of all like to warmly thank the organizers, the Institute of International Affairs, Andrzej, Peter, Ivana, Dominique. All of the people have done a lot to get us organized here in this beautiful building in Prague. I would also like to thank the representative of the Foreign Ministry, Jan Schneidauf, who's going to talk to you later on. I will obviously thank the TEPSA General Secretariat. They are a fantastic team. I would say so as the Secretary General, but it's genuine. They are really a great team, and it's a pleasure to work with them. And I should also, in the end, thank the Commission, because the Commission's projects to some extent finance the venue here, finance some of the things we are doing, and it's very important for our work. Now, I'm extremely happy to be in Prague. I've known it for a long time. It's a beautiful city. It's so beautiful that when I yesterday walked through it with good friends of mine, I told them that I was always a bit shocked when people were talking about the opposition between East and West. I think we should stop doing that, particularly concerning Prague. I mean, when some people take Eastern Europe as Prague, it's just unbelievable. I remember in 1991 when the new situation arose, I took my wife to Prague. She's French. She had never been to Czechoslovakia at the time. And we took the plane from Brussels, and after an hour, the plane started descending, and she said, "God, what is going on? What is happening?" And I said, "Well, nothing is happening. We're just landing in Prague." And she said, "I couldn't believe that Prague is so close to Brussels." I said, "It's as close as your parents live in France from Brussels." So we should stop talking about this opposition. And I would also say that we are part of the same family. We are diverse, but we are part of the same family. And we have a common European history. In that context, I don my head as a Luxembourg citizen for half a minute because I don't know where, the Czechs here certainly know, but the others don't know maybe, that Charles IV, who founded Prague University, and Karlovy Most was actually from the House of Luxembourg. And his father, John of Bohemia, was one of the creators of the Visegrad group. They resuscitated it then in 91, I think, but it happened already in 1335. Now, I should talk more about the future. We are here to talk about the present, the future. The PPCs, the Presidency Preparation Conferences, before each rotating presidency of the Council, are important moments where we try to establish a link between the academic world and the practitioners. And that's what we are trying to do with this conference. Now, we live very momentous times. It's the Zeitenwende, like some people say, war in Ukraine, which in itself is a major challenge, and it has, in fact, an impact on all our policies. All of this will be addressed in the TEPSA recommendations and in the program. The recommendations are normally done via the TEPSA network, have always done so, in order to use the expertise which exists in the network for the presidencies. My final remark is, I would just say that you will have a panel on the TEPSA recommendations, so the authors themselves will talk to you about this. I think they present a very interesting picture of where we are today. I will make one final remark, and that is that we have a conference on the future of Europe, which has just ended, which tried to associate citizens to the reflections on the future of Europe. This will be part of the last of the plenary session tomorrow. I think it has delivered interesting results in terms of policies. I would just add that we should not transform this into a debate about institutional change. 95% of what they have proposed can be done without institutional change and treaty change. So we should concentrate on policies rather. That's my personal view. I will end with a quote from an American diplomat, a friend of mine who years ago in Brussels was asked, what is European integration? Can you describe it? And she said, it's a bit like watching a flock of birds swirling in apparently aimless movement. An hour later, they are still swirling, half a mile down the road. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. I'll be also quite brief. I really only want to say that it's a great privilege and honor to welcome everyone at this Pre-Presidency Conference that we are organizing here, these wonderful premises, Piano Nobile of the Czechia Palace, together with TEPSA. Thanks, Jim, for the wonderful cooperation that we had in this, as well as other partners. Now, this is not going to be a normal presidency, if there is ever such a thing. Our EU ambassador called it a war presidency recently. Well, we'll see, but one thing is certain. The horror of war in Ukraine, close to our borders, profoundly changes the nature of European political debate, which the Czech presidency is to steer in the months to come. Whether it concerns the issue of enlargement of our union, institutional reform with some rather grand ideas being thrown in the air, or reducing the energy dependency. And it's become something of a habit to speak of a political crisis due to the chain of events that have shaken our societies and undermined the public trust in the political institutions and indeed the future itself. Instead, cancelling it has been suggested as kind of the zeitgeist, if you will, from the sovereign debt crisis more than 10 years ago through migration to COVID-19. But that perhaps was all an igra, a play, compared to what's in the store now. And we are in a profound need of strategic solutions, while we often lack three things: clarity, foresight in the political debate, and most of all, time. And that's why it is essential to have exchanges like these, bringing together academics, experts, policymakers, media, and civil society to discuss issues dear to the forthcoming Czech presidency. Over the coming 2 days, we are in for debates on Ukraine, of course. We are the first panels will deal with it, but also the changes in this very region, in Central Europe. We're going to be talking about Green Deal, of course, and carbon neutrality. And we'll critically assess the outcomes, as Jim referred to already, the Conference on the Future of Europe. And this is all essential to inform the vision of the presidency that is to take place in such a turbulent time, and will inevitably be a dynamic project that possibly cannot take place according to some carefully preordained orchestrations. The events won't just allow it. We know the 5 basic priorities now. We know that Ukraine, of course, will play a very prominent role, as will economic resilience, defense and security cooperation, energy, and rule of law and human rights. But these, admittedly, are only vessels that are yet to be saturated. And that's why I would like to not just impress on you the gravity of the moment, but also to thank you from the depth of my heart, and thank all who have made this conference possible. That is, first of all, our partners, TEPSA, but also the EU and its Horizon program, DICE, CEI, Europeum, and the Prague European Summit, and of course, last but not least, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that is hosting us in these beautiful premises. Second, I would like to thank the production team at the Institute, Petr Kratochvíl, the expert convener of the conference, and our long-term representative in TEPSA, our excellent colleagues in the conferences unit and interns who have been providing their invaluable support. I wish you all productive and convivial discussions, and I'm very much looking forward to them as well as their conclusions. Thank you all, and have a great time.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me also welcome you on my behalf. My name is Petr Kratochvíl, I'm one of the organizers of the conference. I will also chair the first panel, but before the panel, we'll have an introductory speech by a representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our host here today in this wonderful building, and it will be Director Jan Schneidauf, the Director of the Foreign Policy Analysis and Planning Department. Let me just very briefly introduce him. I'm particularly happy that it's him because he is not only an experienced diplomat, but somebody who has also an extensive experience with think tank work. So I think we would be hard-pressed to find anyone at the ministry who would know more intimately what it means to cooperate between policy makers, think tankers, and academia. He has also extensive experience with working in the media, Czech radio, but most importantly, as I said, in diplomacy, and that is his task today. And we are really happy and grateful that he agreed to give the introductory talk, after which our recommendation panel will continue. So, Mr. Director, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Kratochvíl Petr, for these very nice words that I feel honored by. And indeed, the thing I mentioned, that I'm not entirely a career diplomat, but with some track record in think tanks and a little bit academia, is something that I think is a useful thing, and which I have always admired in other diplomatic systems behind the Atlantic. So perhaps we can here in Europe learn from it a little bit. Anyway, good afternoon, excellencies, professors, ladies and gentlemen. I am very much honored to be here with you, and I have to begin my short intervention by excusing my boss, namely the foreign minister of the Czech Republic, who wanted to be here himself, but was on quite a short notice prevented by urgent operational issues, so he's unable to do so, which is sad for the conference because other high-profile speakers and high-level speakers who were also interested and invited also couldn't make it. So you have to put up with me, which I feel sorry for you, and I promise that I'm not going to have a speech, not at all, but just a few really short comments. I'm well aware that this event is a tradition, is an institution per se, these pre-presidency conferences, having run for a quarter century, if I'm not mistaken, bringing together 46 institutions from 37 European countries. That's indeed a fantastic framework to move within. And I'm particularly happy that in your ranks it has been able, or you have been able to bring colleagues from Ukraine as well, against the background of the war in the country and the extremely difficult humanitarian situation. There are many famous names among the authors and in this room, so I'm unable to greet you all by name to Prague, but please collectively feel very much welcome. On behalf of the Czech Presidency, I would also like to thank TEPSA for the recommendations, which is a very fresh document, just a few days old, I understand. So I have not been able, and colleagues, to study it as yet. But just glimpsing on the big headlines, you know, it can hardly be more pertinent than it is. Addressing the war in Ukraine, implications for security, the Union, NATO, energy security, something of acute interest, of course, not only here, but the whole of Europe, asylum policy, the millions of refugees and asylum seekers in Europe now. And generally stepping up support for Ukraine. These are all topics that resonate greatly with the intentions and plans for the Czech presidency. So thank you again for that. To conclude, for the last part, and given that I mentioned plans and priorities for the Czech presidency, let me drop a few lines on that. And obviously, the Czech government has not yet officially presented the framework and the motto and the overall all-encompassing priorities for the presidency that's going to happen. And I don't want to preclude that. But what I can do is, give you a sense of the set of topics that we will want to address within the external relations domain, which will be unofficial, and as I said, only to give an idea for the real thing. For the whole nation, I will be speaking only from the foreign ministry perspective. So for the real all-encompassing thing, one will have to wait a little bit more in a matter of a very few weeks. Well, Ukraine was mentioned, so obviously the war there and what it means for Europe as a whole will be very much in the center stage. We will want to focus on obviously the first aid, if you want, the humanitarian side of things, but also the longer-term reconstruction. We will want to see a very high-level meeting with and on Ukraine, and pretty strongly we will speak in the EU for a clear-cut European perspective for Ukraine. While everyone knows that acceding to the EU is a process for many years, which has many very difficult phases, and we have seen the difficulties in other regions, Western Balkans, I mean, of course, then giving the strong political signals accompanied by some functional arrangements, that is something that can be done and should be done rather quickly. Western Balkans, also already mentioned, is yet another territory which has traditionally been in the focus of Czech foreign policy, and we will honor that during the presidency, looking at concrete, tangible opportunities for advancing the integration of the region into the EU, those specific countries that I have in mind, and we will try to overcome some of the very well-known hurdles that we see on the way there. Well, Indo-Pacific will be a matter of attention as well. You may ask, to what extent is Czechia an Indo-Pacific power? Well, not so much, at least not yet. But in the whole European context, of course, many things will be going on, and we want to successfully steer them and help them on their way. That was the geographic things. In terms of themes and topic, in external relations, we want to see Europe strong, resilient, and sustainable. So under those headlines, we have a couple of concrete issues in mind, not least proceeding on strengthening, but also shaping in good ways the transatlantic cooperation with the US and also NATO, of course, against the background of the war. Energy security will feature very prominently, but also geopolitics of new technologies. This is something that we see as a really hugely emerging field for engagement. Resilience to disinformation and strategic communication, not surprising either. On humanitarian aid and development cooperation, we will want to take work further. But crucially, and keeping in mind the heritage this country has from the post-communist revolution, we want to take forward the human rights concept and concrete work. We have domestic examples and track records that we can build on, and we feel that in the whole Union there is now an opportunity to expand on this. We will not be able and we will not want to leave aside the green portfolio. While this country may not have been the biggest advocate of all green in the whole past, we do realize that climate change and the other things won't go away, even with a war in Ukraine, and many European processes are underway there. I think that's more than enough. I've been quite long already, so let me just thank you for your attention. Wish you good luck for the discussions and deliberations. And I hope the Q&A session at the end of this block may offer good opportunity for some initial exchanges on your recommendations as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director. We are very grateful for your openness. Of course, I think we all very well understand that there are multiple actors, as in every political system, influencing the final shape of the priorities. So we really appreciate the openness with which you approach the topic. And we will immediately jump in, and I think it's not in fact a big jump, because many of the issues that you mentioned, I think, will be mentioned in a slightly different context again by our recommendations team, just to explain what recommendations, TEPSA recommendations are about. This is a long-term tradition of the whole network, of the whole association, of presenting some priorities that are based on the expertise of the whole network. There is a recommendation team, this time represented by Ilke Toige and Funda Tekin here, who invite some experts to speak or write recommendations on specific topics. And we have some of these experts sitting behind the table as well. So I would like first to ask the members of the team to make the introduction, and then the other authors, and I will mention them by name as well. Mariam Khotenashvili, who sits to my left, who is also the executive director of TEPSA, Kristi Raik, director of the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute next to her, and then on the other hand, Mihai Sebe, who is head of European Studies Unit at European Institute of Romania, who are the representatives of the author team, which is a bit larger here. So, Ilke and Funda, the floor is yours. Thank you. And then perhaps I should also add that after that, we'll have some exchange, and we'll also open the floor for your questions not only towards the team, but also to Mr. Director. So don't be afraid if you have any question regarding Czech priorities, there will be enough time for you to raise those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. As Peter said, we coordinate recommendations, TEPSA recommendations for each presidency, and it has been a pleasure for Funda, Nicoletta, and myself to coordinate this with TEPSA Secretariat and Institute of International Relations, Prague. So thank you very much for the coordination, cooperation, and to all the colleagues here present with us. We will just shortly introduce the logic of recommendations. And actually, personally, before giving the floor to Funda, I have 3 messages and 3 keywords that I would like to convey to our colleagues in Czech Republic. The first one is the need of continuous rethinking of the European project for the well-being of citizens. Because as we all know, 21st century has been the century of crisis. We have seen the constitutional crisis, the economic crisis, the political crisis due to irregular migration, Brexit, COVID-19, and now we have war in the continent. But the previous century was not so different either. So it proves us once again the European Union is an entity to which a need to adapt, rethink, and reform when necessary. So this rethinking process should be taken as a part of the integration process as a whole, and we just shouldn't undermine them to debates on treaty changes, etc., but rather see it as a model and a reform process that is accompanying the European Union. So we continuously rethink the project and invest in policy areas so that we can always provide for the well-being of European citizens. This is one. The second one is, with the war in the continent, we have seen a very rapid economic and financial sanctions, humanitarian and military aid to Ukraine, and also starting with, for example, with the temporary protection directive for helping Ukrainians that are fleeing the war. And all of these actions were taken very much in unity. But now that we have taken these actions, actually we are facing a dilemma between unity and ambition. And in these recommendations, we would like to push the Czech presidency and all the other presidencies that will follow it to choose ambition, not to undermine unity, but rather give the coalition of the willing a role to move European integration forward. So we hope that the coalitions of the willing will not form and shape themselves to block things, but rather to lead things, which very much connects to my first point, is that we need many areas to reform, and we will talk about this tomorrow in the panel, and it would be a very happy development if various countries and various coalitions of the willing lead processes in these policy areas, and we go for ambition. And the third and my last point, and of course this is going to be my third point, we have the enlargement policy back on the agenda. And of course we will have colleagues from Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia politically assured in June, but what will come afterwards is equally important. So we need like a threefolded perception of the enlargement and neighborhood process. And the first one is advancing in the processes that we have. The Czech presidency already mentioned their dedication to Ukraine and also Western Balkans. This is the first one. The second one is secure continental cooperation in the meantime. So we should work definitely on continental arrangements that would secure cooperation in the continent. And thirdly, reform the EU where needed so we can have a more honest discussion on how to move forward. So enlargement discussion will not necessarily end when these three countries get candidate status, but actually it will basically begin. And this discussion should be way beyond if we want more members in, we have the absorption capacity or not, etc., etc. But it should lead the way on how we would like to organize further cooperation and collaboration in the continent, in a geopolitical world, and with all the challenges that are going to come. So I think I will stop there and give the word to my colleague from the Tekin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilke. And I think I can continue right where you left off, because I think that continuous thinking and consideration, rethinking of the European Union is something that is definitely required. And I think, I thought back to the German presidency, and there it was very clear what the center stage topic was, and that was the pandemic at the time. And I think now with the incoming presidency, it's also very clear what the center stage topic is, and this is the war in Ukraine. And I think the challenge then is how to kind of find a meaningful way to answering this challenge and not forget about other issues that are on the agenda. And Mr. Director already kind of outlined it very well, and how, what is still on the agenda and what we need to look into. But I would want to kind of briefly highlight 3 challenging tasks that I see that still lie ahead of the presidency, in order to kind of frame also the interventions that come afterwards with more details with regards to the different topic. But I think first we have to be aware of the fact that the framework or the plan of action for strengthening the EU security and defense policy by 2030, the so-called strategic compass, was drafted and almost finalized prior to Russia's invasion to Ukraine. So I think here the EU needs to acknowledge that this might not be a strong framework for the EU's action with regards to defense. And this is basically in line with what Ilke said. I think that the soul searching of what is needed on the grounds and how it can be implemented needs to continue. And here the Czech presidency should hence assess what is required on the ground for the European capacity to project credible military force and enhance deterrence, with a view to offering adequate security guarantees to its citizens and neighbors while exercising more collective weight within NATO. So I think this is a very challenging task, and I'm sure that Christy has also more thoughts on that in a couple of minutes. But I think another limit within the European Union, or a weak spot of the European Union and its member states that was kind of disclosed by the war in Ukraine, is actually the dependence on Russian fossil fuels of some of EU countries. And this has actually propelled this issue of energy security high on the agenda, and this is why you also mentioned it rightly for the priorities of the Czech presidency. So it is clear that the EU and its member states need to refocus the energy mixes on alternative energy sources on the one hand, and establish common purchase and storage mechanisms on the other. And then, this was also already mentioned, those actions must then also be in full compliance and commitment with the aims of the Green Deal. And here I really think that this rethinking of energy security can actually really be the driver for going greener in energy. But what we also have to realize is that member states are affected asymmetrically by this challenge, and that it also comes along with economic and social costs. So the Council presidency also needs to be aware of those social and welfare effects of restructuring the energy mixes, and also need to help the member states to buffering this. This could also be linked to member state support for investment choices in terms of certain areas like farmers or vulnerable individual consumers, and then providing some EU tools for actually helping the member states. But what I also think is very important here is that we have to, the EU needs to make sure that it has full commitment to the energy sanctions. And this also includes then finding ways of tackling persistent veto positions of individual member states, such as Hungary. And this is actually bringing me then to the third point, because with Hungary we also have the problem of the rule of law situation in the country, which has already been there for quite some time. And the EU definitely needs to make needs to preserve the rule of law within the European Union, because this is one of the fundamentals of the European Union integration process, and this then might also have effect of the EU's conditionality with regards to the enlargement process that we also already mentioned. So I think it's very important that the presidency ensures that the EU is making full use of its mechanisms, rule of law mechanisms, and just kind of going for a strategy of isolating Hungary in certain policy decisions might not be the solution to move forward. So this is really something to keep an eye on. And then, last but not least, we should also keep in mind that Hungary may well be the EU's biggest headache with regards to rule of law issues, but by far not the only one. So we should also keep an eye on popular fabulous pressures throughout the European Union and its member states in order also to kind of try to deal with this problem, not only once we have the problem of rule of law, but more in a preventive measure. And this is something where I would also be interested in hearing the approach of the Czech government with regards to the rule of law issue then in the end. So yes, basically over to, do I hand over right away to Christy or, okay.
Let's continue in the order, thank you. Sorry, we're having some problems with the mics, but I'm back on. So thank you, Ilke and Funda, for the introductory comments on the priorities, and we'll continue with the authors now, if we may directly. So let's go to Christy first, then to Mihai, and finally to Mariam. Christy, please.
Thank you, and many thanks to TEPSA and the Czech Institute for International Affairs for this opportunity to contribute to the presidency recommendations. My contribution focused on security and defense. And of course, the starting point is that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has already given a strong push to further strengthen the EU as a security actor and to enhance its defense cooperation. But now, a kind of new key question that the EU is facing is, how does the Union contribute to defending Europe against the Russian threat? How does it contribute to defending the rules-based European security order? How does it contribute to preventing the kind of return of an order based on spheres of influence? And in my view, it's really crucial to understand that in order for the EU to be a credible security actor, it cannot focus in its security and defense policy on crisis management outside Europe. Of course, that remains a part of the agenda, but it really needs to look more at how to contribute to European defense. And at the same time, this has to be done in a complementary manner with NATO. We have seen during the past months, I think, the division of labor between the two organizations becoming perhaps clearer than ever. Both have their own roles to play in the current situation. So my first recommendation is to further strengthen EU-NATO cooperation, and in particular in the field of defense capabilities. We have a situation now where a lot of member states have promised to make significant increases to defense spending. And we have the instruments in the EU that can be used to spend this money more efficiently and develop European capabilities in cooperation. So this is not a new thing, but I think there is a new momentum now, and we should look more at how to use these instruments in the EU in a manner that also then develops the kind of capabilities that are needed by NATO and that can be used by NATO in European defense. The second point is cyber defense. It's also a very important area of EU-NATO cooperation and an area where I think the division of labor has worked rather well, better than in the capability development field. It has been a very dynamic area in the EU in the past few years, so there is scope to work further and strengthen further the cyber defense part of EU security and defense policy. And my third and final point is that we have seen in the past months a very kind of big change in how the EU supports security of the eastern neighboring countries, eastern partner countries, Ukraine in particular, and substantial amounts of military aid actually given to Ukraine with EU funds. And now this is something to build on and to work out a more kind of long-term approach to how the EU can support security and defense of its eastern neighboring countries, which hopefully soon will be full candidate countries and are in this kind of very volatile security environment. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mihai, the floor is yours. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for this important opportunity. As regards the question of migration and asylum policy, first of all, we had an undesired effect of COVID-19 pandemic, a 2-year period of respiro regarding the debate on what the migration policies of the EU level should be. This, in a way, is seen in the last 2 years, an increase, for instance, in the aspect related to the digitalization of asylum procedures. Yet, this brief respiro period is now over, and now we have seen an increase of the irregular migration above the pre-pandemic levels, and also the war in Ukraine has generated an unprecedented humanitarian crisis with more than 5 million refugees in Europe. Unfortunately, this time, the public opinion is favorable to the Ukrainian refugees, unlike the year of Europe's refugee crisis when the public opinion is divided both in West and East. What should be done following this context? First of all, one important aspect is to focus on combating irregular migration by preventing the root causes of migration in third countries, with a possible focus on the migration of people labeled as risk factors, and also on fighting illegal stay inside the EU and the human trafficking networks. Secondly, another aspect of importance will be to improve the cooperation between the border structures to increase the exchange of intelligence related to migration and migration networks, and also increase interconnectivity between the member states. A stronger partnership with the African states might be needed in order to fight the migration at the basis, in order to develop these countries and provide the state of origin the opportunity to develop better economies and societies that will provide local-based opportunities for the potential migrants. Also, if in the context of the Ukrainian war, if the crisis is going to prolong, we need to have in mind also the social consequences of the refugee crisis. We need to put in place mechanisms for the social integration of the Ukrainian refugees. Even if they want to return home, there are still many months where they are going to stay in the EU countries. And finally, that's let's say a national perspective, the question of Schengen should be reopened with regard to Romania and Bulgaria. We can no longer have this dissonance in a time when unity is required. If the technical conditions are required, then the political will must intervene and allow those who are able and willing to join the Schengen area in order not to have this division inside the EU. Thank you.
And thank you. And lastly, Mariam.
Okay, great. Do you hear me? So I will present recommendations on stepping up EU support to Ukraine. We have prepared them together with Stefan Meissner from the DGAP Berlin and with Oleksiy Melnik from the Razumkov Center from Kiev. First, I will focus on starting accession process for Ukraine. And second, I'll be talking about increasing EU financial assistance to Ukraine during and after the war. Our recommendations highlight that Ukraine's reconstruction from the war must be framed as a project for building a modern, democratic state, a future EU member. The Czech Presidency of the Council can help to focus attention and political energy on the accession process. This is what Ukraine has applied for, and this is what it is fighting for. In the early 1990s, it was not certain that the new democracies in Central and Eastern Europe would actually be offered the full membership prospect. Also today, as we know, some EU governments are hesitating about Ukraine. Maybe because some Western European companies and societies tend to understand mainly the economic benefits of the EU enlargement, but not so much the political and security benefits. As the Czech scholar, actually, Benjamin Tallis recently wrote, it's not always appreciated that enlargement transformed a moment of great uncertainty into a path of mutually beneficial progress. The EU, we think, has the ability to transform countries into prosperous democracies, but only if it provides the prospect of actual accession. So today, more than ever, when EU politicians or scholars talk about upgraded association agreements or privileged partnerships, what Eastern neighbors hear is a rejection, a signal that they are forever meant to remain outside and be left at the mercy of Russia. Therefore, we think that it's important to stop inventing substitute arrangements and start the actual accession process. So Czechs know very well what it feels like to be left on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain for more than 40 years. So it's no surprise to us that Czechia is one of the strongest advocates of actually granting Ukraine the candidate status in June. A crucial related question, of course, is how to ensure sufficient financial support for Ukraine during and also after the war. The Congress of the United States, interestingly, has just approved more than $40 billion of additional emergency funding for Ukraine. The European Commission published I think, very good communication last week to create a Rebuild Ukraine facility. It acknowledges that the needs resulting from the war are well beyond the means available in the current multi-annual financial framework, and that new financing sources will have to be thus identified. So it remains to be discussed whether it will be better to revise the headings of the MFF or to focus on instruments outside the MFF that might not require unanimity. The Commission also referred to the possibility of joint borrowing on behalf of the EU or on behalf of the member states, and the possibility of using frozen Russian assets was also mentioned. So our recommendation underlines that EU support for Ukraine must be timely, and its size must correspond to the level of ambition for a common European future that is safe and secure. This may involve, of course, very difficult discussions on money, but we think that it's better to hold these discussions earlier than later. For the Next Generation EU program, the EU own resources ceiling had to be increased by 2% of gross national income. Maybe a further increase of the ceiling will be the right way to go about financing the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine, but here the unanimity would also be needed. So the calculations will need to be made so that the presidency can actually start building consensus in the Council. Restarting investment in Ukraine after the war will certainly require a lot of public loans, but also public guarantees from the EU and its member states. But perceptions of risk are also influenced by political signals. So the clearer the perspective of the EU membership for Ukraine will be, the faster will the private investments also pick up. So on the behalf of my co-authors, we wish you all the best in succeeding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the whole team for presenting a very brief summary of the recommendations. I'd like to draw your attention to the full text of the recommendations. You can find them at tepsa.eu under recommendations, and you'll find the whole text and an accompanying video if you're interested. But now perhaps I would first ask Mr. Director if you want to react directly to some of the points raised. There was a question or two already mentioned, and after that we can open the floor to the audience as well.
Thank you indeed, Chairman. It will not surprise you when I say that none of what was said I have any problem with, not at all. So most of it was real music to my ears, including on the security issues as well as on the European prospects for Ukraine, indeed. And to the extent that this community, academic and policy analysis or even policy-making community, can help us in engaging on those agendas and achieving those things, if it is not in June, the candidate status, because, you know, leaders might need a few weeks more time, but then it should be indeed in the second semester of the year, giving a clear light at the end of the tunnel for the Ukrainians, and then of course they will need to work, but that goes without saying, as it is in the Western Balkans. And indeed on the security of Europe, I think everybody is pretty much listening for new and clear ideas on what and how new security architecture will actually look, no? A few months or years down the road. So I think this is the time indeed to throw in proposals and ideas, and ideally also including ideas of how we can get the adversaries subscribed to those new ideas, right? It could be the crucial bit. So thank you indeed for this. I don't have any more substantive comments, but look forward to the further discussion.
Thank you so much. And now we are opening the floor to the audience. So any comments on the recommendations or comments or questions directed to Mr. Director, now is the time. So anyone, and always please identify yourself and then ask your question. So the first question is always the most difficult. There you are, please.
Hello, my name is Uffe Hvidkjær. I'm from Denmark, and I'm a founder of a citizen think tank called Europe Dialogue. And I have a question about the follow-up of the Conference on the Future of Europe. I think it's very important. There are now 49 proposals in this conference, and I was just in the in the Danish Parliament European Committee the other day to say that I would like this conference to continue to have this very nice dialogue across borders with citizens. So how do you see what now? How do you see the situation with the follow-up of the Conference on the Future of Europe? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more questions for the first round? Yes, Paul Schmidt.
Yes, now it works. My name is Paul Schmidt from the Austrian Society for European Politics in Vienna. First of all, I'm very glad to be here, and let me thank very much the TEPSA team for this very ambitious list of recommendations. I sometimes wonder how can we actually preserve unity with such an ambition, but that's the trick probably. I would also like to ask a question to the colleague from the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Following up on what Funda said, I think maybe you want to reply to her question on the issue of diversity within unity of the Visegrad Four. How do you see, how can we build bridges to Hungary? How can we solve the rule of law issue against the background of the conditionality mechanism? And how can we actually advance in terms of energy sanctions? Thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps one last, yes, please.
Now, okay, good afternoon. My name is Egemen Bağış. I'm the ambassador of Turkey here in Prague and former EU minister and chief negotiator of Turkey to the European Union. As especially the two speakers on the panel know very well, we are the longest surviving candidate country since 1958, and I've always argued that Turkey should be placed in the Guinness Book of Records for her determination. But my question is not about only Turkey, but countries that are represented here, Kosovo, Albania, Bosnia. They have worked quite hard to start their accession negotiations. And we are facing now countries leaving the EU, like Brexit. Do you think it's time for multi-dimensional membership alternatives for EU? There are countries which would prefer to be in the customs union, Schengen area, but not necessarily in the European Commission or Parliament. Countries like Switzerland, Norway, UK, maybe in the long run, Turkey could even consider this. Is it a realistic option? Thank you.
Thank you. And now back to Mr. Director, and then perhaps anyone from the team, if you want to answer anything, then let me know. Mr. Director.
Thank you again. On the question of Visegrad 4 and rule of law, and so I certainly wasn't escaping, answers just by coincidence. Well, in this house, in the foreign ministry, we know very well that Visegrad 4 for us is a tool of sub-regional cooperation with the 3 other countries. It is a regional grouping of 4 countries, and we have more formats and more groupings. We have the Slavkov 3 or Austerlitz 3, which brings us together with Slovakia and Austria. There is also the rather fresher format of the Central 5 or C5. And there are some relationships with other groupings and so on. So, the field is varied, and by today, I believe Visegrad 4 is not an identity issue for Czechia or identity framework. Whether it ever was or not, I don't think it's any longer. And when we see some international partners kind of approaching us through the lens, Visegrad 4, we are not too happy about that. And by that, I mean essentially the whole Czech diplomacy. But that is not to say that Visegrad 4 is not useful. I'm definitely not saying that. It is in some contexts and for some purposes. When it comes to the rule of law, well, this is a very profound issue that goes to the nature of the current political establishments and so on. None of us in this country believes that in Czech, in our relations with our neighbors, bilaterally or within V4, we could achieve anything, really. Yeah? These issues, at least to my knowledge, and I'm not necessarily the biggest Visegrad expert, I say that, but these issues are not discussed because they are fundamentally issues of compliance between member states and the community. So you have never heard, and you will never hear, I'm sure, the Czech government at any level saying that this process between the Commission and that country or those countries is wrong. That will never be our position. It's my deepest conviction. At the same time, we know that in our own relationships, we would really not help. We might even hamper the thing if we tried to add tracks to those that are in place. Right. Another question, multi-dimensional EU. And this probably really requires a long discussion. What we know, of course, is that the Union already now can be and is sort of at different speeds. You have the permanent structured cooperation, you have Schengen, you have some things. So it is not a homogeneous union, and the currency, of course, no? which will have exactly the same components for everybody. Whether this can be sort of conceptually expanded to include many more variable geometries and speeds, if you want, I don't frankly know, but I would be a little bit hesitant because it already is complicated, and we don't want to make our continental system overcomplicated, I think. I would probably leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps somebody from the team, if you want to react to any of the points raised. Mariam, do you want to?
I think on Turkey, my colleagues left to me are better placed to respond whether this is something that could be interesting, that whether the multi-dimensional arrangement could be something that could be interesting for Turkey or for the UK. But from my side, what I want to highlight is that Ukraine definitely and the eastern neighbors should not be taken hostage to this idea, because that's not what they want. So for me, the multi-speed and variable geometry Europe is a device to keep Ukraine sort of out of the membership, and I think there should be a separate process from Turkey and UK in this sense. And also, for me, it's important to start to state that it's very important to start actual accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia, as it was recommended by the Commission and by the European Parliament. So a revised methodology is in place of enlargement since 2020. It is providing for a merit-based and reversible process with new sort of increased emphasis on fundamentals such as rule of law, and I think that enlargement process and framework is the right answer to those countries in Western Balkans and in the Eastern neighborhood. Thanks.
Thank you. Funda?
Yes, I think I can only add to that, because I would define the current situation rather in terms of, now we have the debate again on those different concepts that has, come up time and again throughout the entire procedure, and I think that is also part to the fact that the enlargement process has not been working well for all of the accession countries, and as you rightly said, you also have countries that decide to exit the European Union. So I think you have now the European political community concept again that is promoted by Macron, but I think what is rather needed is more also soul searching on the European Union side. What do we want to achieve with our enlargement policy? And I think this is why I welcome this current situation, in fact, so that really, this is now the moment to kind of really go back to our fundamentals and see what we want to achieve with certain policies, and then frame those procedures accordingly. And this is rightly what Mariam said, there is this idea for the stage accession procedure, and I think we really should look into the different models in order then to definitely, maybe find a more workable framework to the entire policy. So this is rather how I would go, but I would not really focus it only on the multi-dimensionality, and also then whether we need an additional form of a European political community. This is really something that needs to be debated. So this is what I would want to, how I would phrase it. But there was also the question with regards to the conference on the future of Europe that has not been answered yet. And I think we all kind of valued this, this approach and this kind of exercise, having this huge deliberation with the citizens, which I think is something that might be taken into consideration to also continue with regards to certain formats and whatsoever. But I think before really thinking about how to continue that, I think we really need to focus on making something out of it in terms of now focusing the implementation, or focusing on the implementation procedure, and see of what we can really use from those ideas, how we can implement it, and then also think of kind of make a real revision of the procedure, so what worked well, what didn't really work well, and how we can then use this is also with regards to for what purposes do we want to use such an additional conference.
I think we already commented on the enlargement policy very much, but there are so many people on this table that cares deeply about this question. I think what is important that Czech Republic, Czechia takes away from this discussion is that with the Ukrainian, Moldovan and Georgian candidacy, the discussion only begins. And there will be, actually we have stated this in the recommendations, and I tried to summarize it in my remarks, so there are three paths that we need to discuss, but the first one comes with advancing in the processes of the candidate countries. So there is no excuse, as Mariam said, all the other alternative or parallel or additional frameworks are just for keeping them away from the membership. So the Union first needs to go ahead in the processes, already existing processes of the candidate countries. So this is the first one. The second one is very much opening the way to talking openly on how to secure cooperation in a continental level. So this is in line with the discussion of borders and enlargement and members, but this is not just limited to the enlargement policy. What we have seen, and what we have seen once again with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is that we need to rethink institutional, political dynamics of continental cooperation. So it is beyond for me then enlargement who gets in out, other forms of engagement, etc. But it's rather what Funda said, no? Go back to the basics and what we would like to achieve with all these policy areas in line with our aims in the continent. And the third part is the reform needs. Definitely, they are all very big issues. So as our colleague from the ministry said, this is the time for organizations like TEPSA and its members to come up with proposals trying to take into consideration all the sensitivities in this very big debate of borders, belonging, membership, cooperation, and all the other continental arrangements that we are talking about. And just for kicking the ball back to you, Czechia is going to organize a follow-up meeting on the conference on the future of Europe. Shouldn't you? So as far as I know that you need to deal with this topic. So I will just stop there and pass the ball back to you.
If I may add also my brief comment on the proposal from His Excellency. I really think that we should really distinguish between two groups of countries. Those who wish for more, and the EU or some EU member states try to prevent those countries for going for more by offering a lower level of integration, from the, I would say, paradigmatically different group of countries that wish for something less than membership, right? And it seems to me that the countries that you then mentioned belong rather to the second group, like Switzerland, like the UK, like perhaps Turkey in the future. And there I think the EU can, and in fact I would argue that it already is quite flexible with the different arrangements, different formats. But that I think is an entirely different, for me at least, an entirely different debate than the debate about Ukraine or Georgia or countries that simply want full membership and the EU says, no, this is the maximum that you will get and not a step further. So I would really both academically but also practically differentiate between these two debates. And then I think that would allow us to proceed very differently in the case of those countries and very differently in the case of those countries who wish for full membership. But that's just a brief remark, but thank you for the food for thought. I think we still have time for at least one round of questions before the break. So anyone wanting to comment, 1, 2, so let's start. Oh, do you, I'm sorry, do you want to comment right now, Mr. Director? Or
whatever works better, whether now or after the next round, I don't mind.
All right, so the lady in the back, please.
I'm Mirjana Najčevska from the Embassy of North Macedonia. So I want to add something which was already mentioned by the ambassador from Turkey. And this is somehow, it seems that when we are talking about the enlargement of European Union, the Western Europe is not part of the topics. Nevertheless, the Czech Republic is all time mentioning this thing, but I can see on the TEPSA priorities and recommendations, there is no mentioning of Western Balkan, like a Western Balkan, and somehow it looks like European Union is more reaction than creation-oriented. European Union is reacting to the war in Ukraine. European Union is reacting to the migration crisis. European Union is reacting in what is going on in Bosnia, etc. But there is not anticipation of what it could happen if the countries from Western Balkans are not entering the European Union, or at least started the negotiation process. Somehow, like European Union is waiting for the crisis and then is reacting to this crisis instead of anticipating to what it could happen if there is such a big gap in this enlargement process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then another question.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'm Ahmed. I'm the Deputy Head of Mission of Egypt here in Prague. So I just find it out of moral obligation that I'm going to give those two quick remarks. First, the Ukrainian crisis didn't stop on Ukraine or Europe. It had impacts on the whole world, and especially on the most vulnerable citizens worldwide in the neighboring countries to Europe. So I was really keen on hearing on food and energy security that is impacting the whole world, especially Africa and Middle East. What is the plans for the next 6 months? I thought that in the priorities and recommendation, there need to be stated something to the partners and other countries in the world. And the second thing, which is regarding the priorities of the Czech foreign policy, it has been stated Indo-Pacific. And we are looking forward also to hear from our Czech friends in the coming 6 months, and in your historical involvement with us in Africa and the Middle East. We are also looking forward to hear from you and to share our thoughts and ideas. So those 6 months will not only be frozen, I would say, topics in the Middle East that will not be touched. Those were the two humble remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And a final, Lucia Mokra, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Lucia Mokra. I'm from Slovakia. Actually, I'm the chairperson of TEPSA. I have one question which is maybe more general and, like cross-disciplinary, and that's the question connected with the energy policy of the European Union, and the question which is quite strategic when we are talking about the current crisis at the Ukraine, the issue of the sanctions, and the number of the discussions which are running on all levels of the European Union and the member states. And both Czech Republic and Slovak Republic are quite dependent on the sources from Russia, which influence, of course, the foreign policy. We are members of the European Union, so we stand for some kind of a position, but we have to also somehow manage the functioning of the member state. And my question is to the representative of the Czech ministry, how you reflect it, whether you have some kind of a strategic position, but also to Christy, how do you think that this kind of the energy security issue may threaten the development of the overall security architecture of the European Union as well? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So one last possibility of asking a question. Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is Héctor Sánchez Margalef from the Barcelona Center of International Affairs. I just want to highlight that, how useful these recommendations are, because I remember in the last PPC in Paris, one of the recommendations was that the Union should try to secure food for the neighborhood in case something would happen. So this is just to say that it's very worth taking these recommendations into account, and this kind of more or less response to the Egyptian colleague. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And let's go back to Mr. Director.
Thank you again. It's been quite a few points or questions, so I'll run through them quickly. On the conference of the future of Europe, of course, we have been following it quite closely. Not necessarily myself or my team in very much detail, but as a whole ministry, indeed. And when you look at the outcomes, we sympathize with vast majority of them. But it has been sort of the belief that for addressing the outcomes of the conference, we don't necessarily need a treaty change in the EU. And now also given the Russian war in Ukraine and other things, this now might not be the right time to change the treaties when so many things are in flux, right? And we speak about a Zeitenwende in Germany, and we might think there is a Zeitenwende in the whole of Europe with how things changed on military issues and so on. So conference on the future of Europe, great. Changing the treaties, probably not, but it might be different in I don't know, a few months or years of time. I don't have information on what exactly a follow-up meeting to that will look like, but that's, I think, a rather technical matter. One particular thing that, you as academics in foreign policy could help us by some creative thoughts is the decision-making in foreign policy. And of course, we have unanimity, and we as Czech Republic, as a middle-sized EU member states, and now I'm not talking presidency, right, which will be a facilitative role, but our national position is that we would not like simply getting away from unanimity because it has risks. At the same time, we have seen, boycotts and blockings without discussions and so on. So we are very much aware of those problems as well. So to the extent that anybody has fantastic creative proposals how to square the circle, right, and not just leave unanimity, but have some form of unanimity with some whatever, safeguards or vice versa, whatever, please, you are welcome. Now, on the EU as being only a reactionary force, well, probably to some extent this is due to the process of the EU evolution, perhaps even the DNA of the EU was always, responding to some perceived needs, rather than, very proactive policy making. However, I think that this is changing a bit as the world is kind of getting wilder now after a hiatus after the Cold War. I see, some processes at some levels being there that weren't there before, like, dedicated foresight exercises being run by the research center of the Commission and the EAS with a lot of resources, actually, and the things that come out of that are pretty impressive in terms of interpreting data and so on. Also, the policy planning levels, which is my own, we very frequently meet as the full EU group and have really deep-going discussions aimed at identifying some ways ahead. The extent to which this then is taken into account by policymakers and decision makers and high hierarchies of the institutions is probably differentiated, is unclear, not least because politicians in democratic systems very often and legitimately look at their domestic feelings in their populations, and you can't, tell them this is wrong. Well, Africa and Middle East, we don't want to leave them alone, but the exercise of prioritization involves saying that something is priority more because of the dictates of the day than some other things. So, yeah, the day dictates us something, but obviously, I mean, Africa is a huge question for the future, the neighborhood with Europe and Africa, and collaboration and various integration frameworks possibly. So I would not want at any all to discount that, but the Czech capacities will be pretty limited. Sahel as such is a thing that we look closely at with the developments that we have there, not too nice ones. I mean, Middle East, we also as Czech Republic have a track record in Middle East policy, which does not necessarily mean this will be the tone of our presidency. And the more traditional portfolios, like development cooperation, there are some concrete things that we would like to see going ahead, like really implementing this triple nexus between, what is it, security, do you know what I mean when I say triple nexus? I'm not a development expert. If you give me 2 seconds, yes, humanitarian development and stabilization policies. This is a notional framework that we want to follow, and a proper programming of the new financial instruments in the EU. Maybe not so new any longer. I mean the NDICI instrument and others, but there seems to be some work to do. And finally, I'm already long again, on energy security, whether we have some concept. Well, obviously, big decisions have been made already at the EU level, no? Like get rid of the dependence on Russia within 5 years in the full scale of fossil fuels, and this is what has to guide us. And the concrete attention now has to be much more on the practical solutions that are needed short term. You know, it's a matter of expanding some specific pipelines. It's a matter in creating new infrastructure as quickly as possible. It's a whole range of things that are now already being actively explored and will need to be further on. But that's maybe too detailed or operational for this big forum. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And final reactions from the team. There was a direct question to Kristi, so perhaps we can start with that one, and then Ilke.
Thank you. Well, first I want to just react quickly also to the enlargement issue, which was already addressed at length, and I agree with what colleagues have said about the importance of keeping the two questions separately, the need to revitalize enlargement policy, and then this question of whether we need some kind of new, larger structure in Europe. To be honest, I don't think this second question is what we now need to urgently address. I mean, the urgent question is how do we respond to the applications for EU membership that have been presented by 3 Eastern neighbors, and the response to these applications then is relevant not only for the Eastern neighbors, but it is very much relevant also for the Western Balkans, because it has to come together with the whole rethinking process of how to make enlargement more efficient. And that's what is the urgent question to be discussed. I don't really see who needs so much at this point of time a debate about creating a confederation or a political community. I think this has been, these ideas have been presented by people who want to divert us away from the enlargement discussion and kind of to some kind of separate track. But that's not the way to respond to the applicant countries. But then on energy security, echoing what was said by the previous speaker, I mean, the big strategic shift has happened, and let's keep that very clearly in our minds, that the goal is to get rid of dependence on Russian fossil fuels. And It will be painful, it will take time, but the EU has defined it as a strategic goal. And then it needs to find a way to get there. But it's really fundamental rethinking of also how we see economic interdependencies more generally. Because it has been kind of at the core of European integration to build peace and security through economic interdependencies. But in the current geopolitical environment, we need a new approach and a very critical reflection of where it is possible to use economic interdependencies as a tool to build security, and where actually economic dependencies create vulnerabilities for us. And the Russian energy is one example, but I think the China relationship is another big debate where we have to tackle the same issue and more on the technology sector. But one key issue in implementing this new energy policy is the question of solidarity. And it's, first of all, between member states. We know some countries are more dependent on the Russian sources than others. So we need solidarity to kind of support the countries that are more dependent. And then also we need to think about different groups among citizens, because there are, people who are more vulnerable to the rising energy prices and more broadly the cost of the war in Ukraine. And in order to keep them on board and in order to be able to pursue these big strategic goals, we also need to have this kind of social coherence aspect in the debates. Thank you.
Thank you. Ilke, you wanted to comment on something, your final word?
Thank you. And thank you, Hector, for giving positive feedback on the recommendations. Actually, I just wanted to remind that we have included Western Balkans for the Slovenian presidency and had a chapter on them back then. And actually, we need, I would really like to see that we kind of change the chip again. So giving candidacy status or going ahead with the processes of these candidate countries is not a favor to the candidate countries, not necessarily just a favor to them. This enlargement policy was the best foreign policy tool the EU had to transform the continent and secure cooperation. So I think one of the essential things that we should focus on is not just like who is going forward, who is staying behind, what kind of status, rather like bring back that spirit in enlargement policy and openly discuss both how we can move forward in these processes that we have pending, how we can secure support in the EU for that, so reforms, all the honest and open discussions between the EU members at the leadership level. And then when we are done with all this, I agree with Christy, we should also think about more continental discussions on another Council of Europe attached to the EU or whatever, European political community or whatever we want to call it. But let's try to go back to the, I know this is not going to happen and we're just going to give the candidacy status to Association Trio and forget about it if possible, but let's not do that and focus on the transformative power of the enlargement policy once again for securing cooperation in the continent. That is the positive message I wanted to give. Thank you.
Perfect. We need positive messages. Anyone else from the recommendations team, do you want to have a final reaction, Mihai? And
a very short comment on the question of enlargement. I believe that it should be open door.
Can you speak up, please?
Yeah, though enlargement should be open door policy and merit-based, and also we should think about using other regional formats and to expand. For instance, the 3 Cs can be also open to Ukraine, Republic of Moldova, and Georgia as an antechamber of the EU enlargement. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Director.
Thank you so much. I don't want to delay, but you have a very quick encouragement, because what I hear is fantastic, and I would like to encourage you to deliver your recommendations on this issue, I mean the enlargement of the EU, to capitals around Europe, in the sense that yes, we need to think boldly for the future in terms of future enlargement of the Union, and frankly I don't think that even giving candidate status will be easy enough. I think that alone will be difficult as a political signal, and then actually moving to start the process will be perhaps even more difficult. And but there is, if there is a promising way further, I think this is with this one, because as was already said by one of you, without having the prospects for real EU membership, full EU membership in future, things will not work. And I very much agree with that. I'm deeply convinced about that. So please spread the message as much as you can. Use all channels. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll definitely try to do so. Let me thank again the recommendations team, as well as Mr. Director, who was so graceful to spend his time with us and openly discuss these very sensitive issues. So thank you very much.